Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Labour Justice Barometer podcast. I'm Aisha Adam.
And I'm Debbie Collier.
And we're your hosts today on the Labour Justice Barometer. Artificial intelligence is shaping the world of work, from recruitment and productivity monitoring to performance management, surveillance, and retrenchments. But as AI systems become more embedded in work and society, difficult questions emerge around employment relations, fairness, accountability, privacy, and inequality. In this episode, we consider whether South African labour law is equipped to deal with AI in the workplace. We also reflect on the recent allegations that a presiding judge used AI to write a judgment concerning the maintenance of minor children, and more recently, the withdrawal of South Africa's draft AI policy after fabricated AI-generated sources were discovered in the document itself. And what do these incidents reveal about governance, human oversight, and public trust in emerging technologies? The risks of AI include unfair and discriminatory algorithmic decision-making, as well as excessive surveillance in the workplace. And so we also consider the impact of automation on a labour market with high unemployment and whether our existing legal frameworks, such as the Labour Relations Act, Employment Equity Act, and Protection of Personal Information Act are capable of responding to these challenges. Debbie, before we get into labour law specifically, South Africa's draft AI policy was recently withdrawn. What do you think that incident tells us about the challenges of AI governance in South Africa more broadly?
Thanks, Asha. Yeah, so just to restate the facts, the draft AI policy had got to the level of being approved by Cabinet in March. It was then gazetted in the Government Gazette in April for public comment. I think we had until the 10th of June to comment on the draft AI policy. But within 2 weeks, the policy was withdrawn when fake references were detected in the document. And the minister, in the withdrawal notice, really speaks about the deficits and what went wrong here. So I'll quote from his withdrawal notice. The department firstly acknowledges did not deliver on the standard that is expected or acceptable for an institution entrusted with a role to lead South Africa's digital policy environment. And the most plausible explanation is that AI-generated citations were included without proper verification. This should not have happened, he goes on. In fact, this unacceptable lapse proves why vigilant human oversight over the use of artificial intelligence is critical. And he goes on to state that there will be consequence management for those responsible for drafting and quality assurance. Subsequently, 2 officials were suspended from the department, and in the same week, a similar allegation arose in the Department of Home Affairs, and 2 senior officials were suspended following the detection of artificial intelligence hallucinations also, which were cited as references appended to what was the Cabinet-approved revised white paper on citizenship, immigration, and refugee protection. So what is happening here, is quite clearly lapses in governance and processes with verification. And then, of course, we also have the allegations of the acting judge who used AI to write her judgment. And there have been a number of previous incidences where legal practitioners have cited hallucinated cases in the drafting of their documents for legal proceedings. So these incidences and transgressions have implications for the individuals concerned. There have been suspensions, possibly dismissals, and reputational damage. And it also indicates clearly from a governance perspective that our institutions are not really prepared or ready for the impact of AI and how to use the technology responsibly. Governments and institutions like our own, our universities, and institutions within the legal profession more broadly, we're all trying to regulate these technologies, but we're still learning to understand the technologies. And so, many, I can't obviously speak for all of these institutions, but the protocols are perhaps haven't been fully developed and implemented. Verification systems, accountability standards, these are all, really, we are rushing to develop them as quickly as we are adopting AI in the workplace. So it raises not only ethical considerations, but also how do we use AI appropriately. And it also, of course, asks us to reflect on what would the role of labour law be within these conversations. So Aisha, from your perspective, would you say that our labour law is equipped to deal with the use of AI in the workplace?
I think in my opinion, I would say not fully. I think our existing legal framework gives us some important starting points, but again, it was largely developed for a workplace where identifiable human actors rather than, algorithms made the decisions. And we do have our constitutional rights around dignity, equality, privacy, and fair labour practices, Section 9, 10, 14, and 23. And we also have legislation like the LRA, the EEA, and POPI, all of which can potentially apply to AI-related harms. But the challenge is that AI creates forms of opacity and automation that our labour framework does not always deal with comfortably. So, for example, if an algorithm screens out job applicants, or flags workers as underperforming, employees may not even know how that decision was made, what data was relied on, or whether, there were existing biases within the system. And that becomes very concerning, particularly in South Africa, because our labor market is already shaped by deep structural inequalities around race, around class, gender, and of course, access to technology. So I would say the law gives us fragments of protection, but we do not yet have a coherent framework for algorithm management, automated decision-making, or even workplace surveillance. Debbie, in a country, like I said, already facing extremely high unemployment levels, how should South Africa be thinking about automation and labor market disruption? And you've also written book chapters of this, which we will link for our listeners in the description. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this.
You raise important points about structural inequality around race, class, and gender, and access to technology. So the digital divide should be an important factor in our decision making. I think we really need to be intentional when we think about the adoption of AI and the use of AI and automation. Of course, we can't simply reject the technology that is being developed, but we obviously cannot assume that the market will produce a fair outcome. But we also shouldn't think that it's impossible to regulate or that the consequences are inevitable. So it really comes down to, being very intentional and having the spaces to engage. In every space of governance, we should be asking ourselves as a central question, not only whether the technology might create efficiency or what are the short-term gains, but we should really be looking at the impact of the technology and whether it supports the development of a public good, whether it supports decent work, inclusion, and skills development. And our decisions and our governance structures should be informed by those discussions. We need to avoid treating technology as simply neutral or inevitable and beyond our control. And we need to really reflect on the fact that technologies are developed according to the priorities and values of the people who design and develop the technology. So, we, of course, hear about the tech bros. And so as academics, we should also be interrogating and writing about and thinking about these values and priorities and how these technologies are impacting society. And that should influence our governance and our adoption and use of these technologies. So the technologies we use are shaped by our choices, and our employers, of course, make these decisions about whether AI and which AI tools will be used to support work and to monitor or manage workers. And workers and unions must, of course, have a voice in technological change in the workplace, particularly where the adoption of technology automation can affect jobs or skills development and workloads, or impact on levels of surveillance and work intensity. And unfortunately, I think this is where we fall short in South Africa. At the point of retrenchment, yes, there are obligations to consult, but this is too late. And although our labour relations framework did envisage this dual channel for workplace consultation and joint problem solving, which would have given us meaningful opportunities to engage with operational changes impacting on the workplace. So our restructuring, introduction of technology, productivity and skills development should all be part of a consultation process. And unfortunately, this dimension has really remained weak in South Africa. And too often workers are only encountering technological change at the point of retrenchment or restructuring when decisions have effectively already been taken. So I think this is really a critical point of engagement that we need to interrogate. And how do we resurrect a consultation forum within the workplace? But the problem, of course, that doesn't solve everything, even if we had those consultation channels, because of processes of externalization and casualization, which often leave workers, while they may have access to work opportunities, they are at arm's length with the firm who provides the work opportunities. So Uber drivers, platform work, for example, often the lead firm might even be in another jurisdiction. So this becomes a challenge, of course, for consultation and the need for the development of new labour standards, which we see now in the context of the ILO's proposed convention for decent work in the platform economy, which we will talk about in a future episode. So Aisha, I think it's really, there's a lot that we need to reflect on in the development of new policy and legal frameworks.
You're listening to the Labour Justice Barometer, and we'll be right back. Okay, so let's step outside the doctrinal and legal frameworks and policy issues of AI. In your opinion, are you optimistic about AI in the workplace, or do you think the risks of use of AI currently outweighs the benefits? Debbie, you need to get a bit personal here. How have you felt about AI in the academic workplace?
Yeah, actually, I don't think you should ask me that question. I think, and certainly I know I'm not alone. I know my peers share my frustrations. We have really, I think, in the same way that government has been caught off guard with the use of, technology and the use of AI and hallucinated references, we are unfortunately seeing this increasingly too in the university environment. And it is outstripping the pace at which we are developing, the regulation standards. And so, obviously, used in the correct way, AI, I'm sure, can have significantly positive impacts. But I don't know if we really know what is the correct way to use AI in many of our environments. And certainly, the use of AI that creates fake hallucinated references will not be the correct way. And this is what we're seeing. I've had oversight of students' research for more than 2 decades. And yet in the last few months, I've seen students failing because of the way they've used AI and for generating fake references, including fake references. So this is, for me, is a huge problem. And, I'm largely seeing the use of AI to the students' detriment, which is really something that we need to critically reflect on, quite apart from the psychosocial hazards of the lecturer who has to read and engage with students around their use of AI. So, apart from the ethical issues, Aisha, I really am concerned about the capabilities that we should be developing in our students, the capabilities to, reason critically and to engage with legal materials and to think independently about the law and law in society. And I really do have a concern that these capabilities are being whittled down and weakened with the use of AI. So I'm sure this is something we're going to pick up again in a future conversation. But yeah, let's maybe get to the point of our Labour Justice Barometer question, Aisha. And I think I've made my views quite clear on this. But if we place South Africa's preparedness for dealing with AI in the workplace on our Labour Justice Barometer, from red to green, where would you place this, Aisha?
I think for me, Debbie, this sits firmly in the orange category, but leaning heavily towards red. And I say orange because there is at least growing recognition that AI needs regulation and oversight. And, we are seeing policy discussions emerging, though under scrutiny. Constitutional rights do remain relevant in these areas. And there is this global awareness increasing around algorithmic discrimination and workplace surveillance. But I think the reason that it leans towards the red is because the pace of technological change is moving far faster than legal and institutional reform. Workers are already being managed, monitored, and assessed through digital systems, often without any kind of transparency or meaningful recourse. And especially in a country like South Africa, those risks are intensified by existing structural inequalities and the digital divide. So AI is not entirely entering a neutral society. It's entering a society that's already shaped by exclusion, high unemployment, and unequal access to opportunity. So in my opinion, unless labor law and employers engage proactively with these issues, there is a real danger that AI simply automates and entrenches old inequalities in just new forms.
Thanks, Aisha. Yes, I can't agree with you more. I think if we are to shift the dial towards the green, we really do need to have these spaces for critical engagement on the use of AI and the development of appropriate governance standards, and not simply go with the flow as it appears to be happening in many of our spaces. So thank you for this conversation. And I think that wraps up our episode for today. Thanks also to our listeners who are welcome to share their thoughts with us. And as always, we've included the relevant links in the episode description.
Thanks, Debbie. See you in the next one.
This podcast is not intended to constitute legal advice.